Welcome back for all of our listeners. And if you're new here, hello. I'm Kimberly, your host, and this is The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. So today I have a guest with me, and her name is Kiana Davis. Kiana is a more than 14-year-long educator who has run a private tutoring and childcare business called Tutor Kids and More for the past 5 years. She has a passion for education, being of service to those in need, and she's even a student herself. Kiana is going to school for her master's in clinical mental health and substance use disorder counseling. And her big dream goal is to create a place where she can provide the community with private tutoring, childcare, mindfulness activities or workshops, mental health support, substance use disorder counseling, and more. Kiana, it is so good to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, just to kind of contextualize who you are, where you come from, and what your real sort of passion or drive is in your business.
So I'm originally from Morristown, New Jersey. That's where I was born. I have been here, moved around a little bit, but not very much. And I started my love for education very young. I did go to the daycare center that I went to as a kid. So just being there and working with the director that, practically raised me really helped me to see how much of an impact you can make on children's lives and how long I've been doing it. And I was just immersed in wanting to learn more about how I could help kids even better. So that's what kind of drove me to becoming a teacher, and then started the business after I graduated with my teaching certification. I am K through 6 certified. That is what I teach and tutor. So, I feel like my drive, my main passion has really just been like what you said in the intro. I just love helping people, and I'm still learning all the different ways that I do that. And tutoring and education and just being a teacher is one of those ways. But it's really meant a lot to me to work with kids and help them to be better versions of themselves and see themselves in a different light.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I love it. I know for myself, that's part of why I do what I do as well, right? I think every teacher, when it comes down to it, they're not in it for any sort of financial compensation. That just happens to be a side effect, right? They're in it because they love teaching and they love the kids. And I know that there's that saying, it says that, those who can't teach do, right? Or those who can't do teach. It can go both ways. And I really think there's a big distinction between people that do and people that teach, right? But is it actually doing? You have to learn how to do, and in order to learn how to do, you have to be able to be taught how to do. Teachers come in all different sorts of formats, right? Just because you don't work as a teacher in a public school per se doesn't mean that you're not still a teacher on some level.
Absolutely. Right, exactly. And I've been really lucky enough to be able to teach in schools and run my business outside of school while also being a student, which sounds crazy when I say it like that. And when I say it to people, they're like, when do you have a personal life? Do you have one? I do. I just really enjoy learning. And even as a teacher, you're learning all the time. As a tutor, I'm learning. And the more present you can be, the better you're able to learn and be teachable. And that is what you're talking about. Being a teachable teacher is just as important as being a good teacher.
Yes, 100%. People think that for some reason when you're a teacher that you know everything. I don't know everything, nor do I pretend to know everything.
Either.
I tell my students that all the time. I regularly, just because of the I'd say the types of students that I deal with, I regularly get them asking me questions that I don't know the answers to, right? Because we'll be doing some sort of inquiry-based activity or something that like a student-led learning, so it's something that they're wanting to do that I might not necessarily know, the whole spectrum of what it's about, but I can help you find the right answers, right? And guide you to the right answers without giving you those right answers. And they'll regularly ask me questions and I'll be like, oh, gee, I don't know. And I've gotten very good at not feeling ashamed or any type of way about saying I don't know the answer to that, because there's no shame in not knowing, right? It's just in not wanting to know the answer. So then it turns into a lesson. Then it turns into a lesson about about like how we can find that answer, right? Okay, I don't know the answer. Where could we possibly find that answer, right? So it's a learning experience, and that for me is one of my big drivers for why I teach.
I love that. I love that that's your main reason, because it really should be an experience for the both of you. And I love that you said that you often say it to your students, because I do too. I'm constantly saying, teachers don't know everything. I don't know everything. And I always pull out my phone and I look up something if I'm not sure, or if I want to clarify, if they ask you a question I don't know. I'm like, that's what we have Google for. And the problem solving aspect of it, they need to see that even when you're an adult, you still have to search for the answer. It's not always going to come to you naturally. And that is okay. That is a natural thing for you not to have the answers. And being humble is a gift when you're a student and a teacher. And I think the best tutors and teachers are the ones that have the most humility. So yeah, I agree with you totally.
Yeah, I would say so. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's hard. And I always want to encourage students to not be satisfied with just one answer, right? Like, this is one perspective on an issue. Let's go find the other perspectives. What other possible things could we find out? Like, are there people who have a different answer? Why are there different answers in the first place, right? Like, thinking critically like that, and being able to not only process the information, but process the difference in information is something else that I think is really important.
Absolutely. Discernment is a tool for sure. And being able to distinguish that is very important. And the younger that they learn that skill, the better. So I love that.
I would agree. So you said that you, and I know, like, for myself, I used to as well when I was teaching, and when I was in, like, I was in public school teaching, I was I was still doing my university to get my teacher's credential, and then I was also like teaching as a job. And so I very well remember the days when I was like all over the place. I don't envy you. I will say that that's a very, very busy lifestyle. It's a high amount of functioning. So kudos to you. I feel you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So what would you say? Because you said you teach in a public school right now. So, but you also have your own, you run your own business. What would you say the educational experience has been like for you so far?
I've noticed a lot in the 5 years I've been doing this. And I think that when I first started out, it was, I feel like my actions and how I was teaching was a lot more passion based, where I feel like in the public schools, I often lose that spice, that urge for something new, that challenge, because I feel like once you get used to a kind of job, especially when you've been doing it for more than 1 year, it just becomes, you're like on autopilot. And at the same time, I've also noticed that my students have like grown to sadly like lose a little bit of that drive too when it comes to tutoring with me. And I'm noticing it in the school system. And I'm like, well, maybe there's something that's happening here where we're losing focus on the fun aspects of learning. And I feel like a lot of the times, because school is so structured, I find myself in my tutoring sessions thinking, okay, all we have to do is do this and do this. And I'm like, no, when you first started this, it was just about having fun with them and they were learning. And I've been like kind of refining that love for the tutoring aspect, because being in school, like I said, it kind of waters that down because you're just in the same mode often, So I feel like my business has helped me to see the differences in how the kids have shown up for themselves in the classroom, but also individually with me, because sometimes it can be the same and sometimes it can be completely different. And I enjoy observing and like critically thinking about why those things are happening, or why a student that I've had for 2 years is working on things this way as opposed to how they're working on it before. And it could be that they are having trouble in school, or they're losing focus on something, and they come to me and then they find that focus again. And that's where I'm like, okay, you are this child's safe place to like having a good time learning and not think about whether they're wrong or whether they're right, or if they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, when it's all about making mistakes. And I really feel like in school systems, they're not always able to do that and do it in a safe place that they can feel they get the most reward from. And I really pride myself in providing that space for them.
That it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up sometimes. And yeah, you're right. The public school system, unfortunately, does not allow for, not that it doesn't allow for mistakes, but you are almost, I don't want to say punished, but you're almost punished for your mistakes. Because like grade wise, if you got the answer wrong, you didn't get the point, right? And so that's it, and we're moving on. But there's no learning from the experience. There's no not that there's not any talking about it, because the teachers that the good teachers that I know will always, take up tests and like, why did we get this wrong and whatever. But that's the teacher's prerogative. That's not something that is provided by the system, right? And so
absolutely,
a lot of times people or students miss out on like being able to learn from their mistakes, and just even knowing that like making mistakes is okay.
And necessary.
And precisely. And I feel like I'm almost the pot calling the kettle black here, because I like to hold myself to a high standard of not making mistakes, right? And I really sometimes need to check myself, like it is okay to not be perfect. I tell my students all the time, my saying is practice makes progress, right? When they first start with me, when they great minds think alike. When they first start with me, they always say practice makes perfect, right? And I'm like, no, practice makes progress. And we talk about why that is a healthy motto, as opposed to practice makes perfect, right?
And
I mean, that's just my opinion, but I think that's a much better way of looking at it, right? And a much better way of framing your mistakes as a learning experience rather than something to be ashamed of.
Absolutely. And I love that we keep bringing it back to the learning experience, because learning isn't supposed to be a black and white binary. It's not supposed to just be this or that. It's supposed to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. And practice is what that is, because you're not always going to show up 100% when you practice one day compared to another day, or you won't, have the results that you had one day the next day sometimes. And that is a part of the progress that is, and I love that we both say that, because it really is important. And I feel like we lose that aspect of learning because of that perfection, that standard that they're always trying to reach, that isn't healthy for them or the teachers, honestly, to be frank.
Yeah, well, because it's a whole mindset, right? I think that's the mindset that's sort of perpetuated by the system, but also the expectations like of the system, right? Like the public schooling system or the private schooling system, and it's nobody's. I say this all the time. It's nobody's fault that that's the way it is. It's just the way that the system was designed, right? I don't blame a car for operating the way that it does. That's just the way it is, right? It's just about finding ways around that, or finding ways to mitigate that. That I think is really important, particularly if you want to give your child the best educational experience, because for a lot of children. Schooling in a public schooling sense, and sometimes even in a private schooling sense, isn't always the answer for that.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially in the private school sense, because they really do have so much free reign to do things how they want. And not to say that private is better than public or vice versa, but I just find that sometimes it's hit or miss with those private schools, because you don't know what their core values, the morals, the intentions are. But in public schools, that sometimes gets lost too. And it's sad. It's sad. But I appreciate people like us, because a lot of times the best teachers do teach outside of school too, so that they can allow that space and allow their students to show up as their authentic selves and not as their school selves, if that makes sense.
Totally. I'll communicate with teachers of students that I see, on a regular basis, and the teacher will say something completely different than what I'm saying to the parents, right? And I mean, communication is really important, but I think that that's a really good point for you to make there. That oftentimes, a child will show up differently at school in a structured, rigid learning environment than they will with a tutor, right? Or with an alternative educator, or with an educational professional, or whatever title you want to attach to it, right? They'll show up differently outside of school, right? I also have parents, on the other hand, who will say to me, that their child is this and this because they've been given information by the teacher,
From the teacher.
or they know things right about their child. And or an often common thing that I will hear is that oh, my child doesn't listen to me, they don't want to learn, I can't teach my child, right? They don't want to listen to me. And I always take great care to explain to the parents that that's not anything that is anybody's fault, but oftentimes, particularly when children reach a certain age, they don't want to listen to their parents, right? The relationship that a child has with a tutor or an educational professional is much different than the one that they have with their parents, right? Typically, if your mom says, okay, well, Johnny, we're going to sit down and do our math homework now, Johnny is going to be like, no, I don't want to, right? If he's in that mood, no, I don't want to, right? And then it escalates into a family fight. If I say, okay, Johnny, why don't we work on your math homework together? Why don't we work on this new math concept or this new writing piece that we're working on or whatever it might be? It's okay, sure, because it's essentially someone that you're working with who starts as a complete stranger, right? And who starts as another, hopefully positive, adult role model in this child's life. And so making that sort of connection between like, oh, it's just the nature of the relationship, right? And that's not to say that parents can't teach their children, not at all. I don't believe that's the truth. There are a lot of parents who can definitely teach their children, but it helps to have that other adult educator, positive role model sort of figure, I think, in their life.
I would agree. I would totally agree. And I resonate with what you're saying completely, because oftentimes that is the first phrase that I get. The teacher says they're doing this, or the teacher says the school is saying they can't do this. They don't know how to read. They don't know how to, and I'm just like, the list is so long of what they're saying your child is incapable of doing. But then when they sit down with me for 45 minutes, they do all the things. And I'm like, it's very interesting. And the shock that I get from parents is really what I've kind of enjoyed seeing too, because they're just like, they don't do this in school. They do that for you. And I'm like, yeah. And I think, like you said, like, it's not just creating the space, but it's allowing them to see you as a different person, as a different role model, like you mentioned. And that's why when I talk about my business, I often mention mentorship as a part of what happens, because I am doing my best to show your child how to operate, not just within the 45-minute section of our session or the 6 hours that they're in school, but 24 hours a day for the rest of their lives. I want to instill in them things that will carry with them. And that has a different weight than, like you said, when your mom is telling you sit down and get your homework done because you got to go to bed soon. Like, it's just different. So yeah.
And I think being able to give children and give students the skill set that they need, sometimes those things, and this has happened before, sometimes those things are definitely said by the parent and are they're instilled by the parent, but they are reinforced. I have, like, no word of a lie, I have had parents of students tell them something like that they should do with like a problem or whatever, and the student will be like, no, that's not the way you do it. I'm sitting there like, but that is the way you do it. And so I'll be like, okay, like, let's try it this way, and I will literally do the exact same thing, and the student will be like, oh yeah, okay, that's how you do it. And like, mom or dad is in the background kind of smirking like, see, I told you, but they don't say anything, right? Because then that sets off a dynamic, right? So the idea of like being able to reinforce family values too, I think, is really important. And that's different for every family, right? But I think most parents, when it comes down to it, like, they really want to instill certain values in their child, right? Work ethic, integrity, discipline, accountability, things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my big things I talk about is tutoring helps our child grow their academic accountability. And I didn't even use that phrase until I started this business, because I was just like, what phrase is really going to encompass the independence and the confidence you want your child to have? And I feel like accountability is one of the most independent and confident things you can have for yourself, because you are looking at what you can do and you're looking at what you can't do, but you're not looking at either one negatively or positively, they're balanced and you're looking at them as a
Mm-hmm.
whole and you're able to see the full picture. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of times I'm sure you can attest to this, as you come across parents who only focus on the negative, or they say all the things that their child can't do. And then it's hard for you to pull out, well, what are they really good at? What do they like to do? Because that's
Mm-hmm.
what you want to know. You want to know what they can't do, but you're going to find that out anyway. I want to know what your kid likes. I want to know what sparks them up. I want to know what they enjoy, because
Mm-hmm.
we need that balance. We need the two sides of your child to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what they really need to balance out, not that just their academic accountability or just academics in general, but them as a person.
Mm-hmm. And teaching them skills that they're able to foster, doing things that they
Yeah.
like to do, with
Mhm.
things that they do with while working on skills that they need to improve on, right? Like, for
Exactly.
example,
Right.
your child loves, like, I don't know, Legos or something, but they hate to write. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, let's do a writing project, but on Legos,
On
right?
Legos.
Like, it's
Exactly.
just finding that creative sort of balance, to be able
Yeah.
to spark that child's interest. And, like, I know this is a huge buzzword, but that's really student-led learning and in group-based learning,
Yes.
because you're taking the child's interest and you're turning it into an educational experience, but you're doing it in such a way that they don't even really realize that they're learning. You make
It's
it a game
happening.
and you make it
Mm-hmm.
fun, right? Make it
Yeah.
a project. Like, project-based learning, kids don't even realize that they're learning, right? They don't even realize
Exactly.
that they're actually working on skills that, like, they don't really like. If I asked a child to sit down and, who hates writing, if I asked them to sit down and
Right.
write me a paragraph, they'd be like, what? I don't think so. But if we're doing a
Right.
project on Legos and I say, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
can we write this informational paragraph so that you can show it to mom and dad, or so that you can show your friends, or so that you can put together a project of some sort? Like, making it
Right.
fun and engaging is something that I think is really important. And not not saying that the public school system doesn't try to do that, because I know a lot of teachers in public schools try for that
True.
level of creativity. But if you're dealing with
Mm-hmm.
20 children in a classroom, or even 15, if you're dealing with 20, 25, 30 kids in a classroom, or even 15, how are you going to appeal to all those different kids and still meet your
Right.
sort of expectations, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's difficult. And I've seen teachers who are able to spin it in a way that most of those kids are interested in. Most of those
Mm-hmm.
kids have a resonating feeling, but it's really, I mean, statistically impossible to really accommodate all of the different learning styles, creativity
Mm-hmm.
aspects of a child, all those things, their interests. And like I said, like that's one of the best parts about private tutoring and being a private educator is you can, I mean, one of my first questions that I ask students when I meet them, like one of the first things we do in a first session is I ask them what they like to do. And that is like time, not instruction. I am sitting there and I'm saying, okay, so what do you do for fun? Some of them don't even know how to answer me. And I'm like, do people ask you, like, what do you do for fun? What do you do for fun? What do you
Yeah.
do when no one else is telling you what to do and you're alone and you want to have fun? And then, like, I probe them and then they're like, oh, she actually cares about me, not just what I'm doing or
Mm-hmm.
what I can't do. She wants to know about me. And then that is like the best first step to a
Mm-hmm.
relationship building. Yeah.
Right. And that's really what it is with private tutoring, is building that relationship with a child, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're able to approach them in a within an educational atmosphere where
Right.
they feel supported, they feel safe, and they want to explore. Because, like, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of kids come at tutoring, when I first start working with kids, some of them come at it with the attitude of, like, well, I don't need a tutor. Like, tutors are for kids who don't get it, right? They're for kids who are
Yes.
behind. Not true. Not true at all.
Mm-mm.
I have other
Mm-mm.
children who are gifted and they want to, or like ahead of their grade, right, in school, and they want to go
Right.
further, and their parents want them to be, exploratory and creative and foster their
Mm-hmm.
passions. And so
Right.
following that level of thinking is something that
Right.
is totally doable with a
Mm-hmm.
private educator. It's not doable in the public school system, because you've got to kind of
Right.
cater to the whole class, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly that. It's hard to do. And like I said, it's even the best teachers, it's still hard to do.
It's a struggle.
But
it's a struggle.
Yeah. It's where we come in. That's where we come in.
Exactly. I love it. Thank you so much, Kiana, for being on this podcast with me. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and taking the time to talk with me. So thank you. It's refreshing to talk to another educator who has the same sorts of values and educational philosophies. I talk to a lot of educators that I get really excited about, but not a whole lot who are close to my age. So it's nice to be able to chat with you.
No, I agree. I'm so glad that I stumbled across you and you were, just open to hearing my story and just giving me the space to talk on your platform. I really appreciate it. And I had a great time. I look forward to doing it again. Thank you.
100%. 100%.
If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out. You can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.